Hello everyone. I just realized we are in the last week of April already. This year is definitely running away from something. Anyway, as usual, I have a pretty amazing selection of reports for you today, as it was World Malaria Day on Sunday and World Intellectual Property Day yesterday. I am highlighting publications related to these. In addition, I also have something for you on gender-based violence and COVID-19, something on trade, manufacturing, and intellectual property policies, and how that relates to Africa's response to COVID-19, as well as something on the intersection of gender, climate, and security. Okay, let's go. First is a WHO report that analyzes the potential impact of health service disruptions on the burden of malaria in countries in sub-Saharan Africa. The premise of the report is that the current COVID-19 pandemic is a huge threat to global efforts to reduce the malaria burden in sub-Saharan Africa, where health systems are fragile. Using a modeling framework, this analysis focuses on the impacts of disruptions to mass campaigns and continuous distribution of insecticide-treated nets, as well as access to effective malaria treatment with a focus on 27 sub-Saharan African countries, which account for 85% of the malaria cases and deaths in the region. The key messages from this analysis are: number one, it is critical that malaria endemic countries minimize any disruptions of malaria prevention and treatment during the COVID-19 response. Number two, although the current analysis does not factor in the effects of disrupting seasonal malaria chemoprevention and indoor residual spraying, their disruptions would also lead to considerable loss of lives. It is critical that these interventions be implemented as planned. The third key message is that to help countries maintain malaria prevention, diagnosis, and treatment, WHO, with extensive support from its partners, has recently developed guidance on tailoring malaria interventions in the COVID-19 response. The fourth key message is that access to and use of insecticide-treated nets should be maintained through campaigns that are adapted to protect health workers and communities from COVID-19. Case management of malaria, including prompt diagnostic testing and treatment, should continue to be delivered safely within the package of essential health services. Number five, in addition to the impact of disrupting seasonal malaria chemoprevention and indoor residual spraying, modeling scenarios do not account for possible disruptions to global commodity supply chains. There is also limited understanding of the spread of COVID-19, its epidemiology, and how it interacts with malaria in sub-Saharan Africa. As more data become available, the models will be updated and countries will be provided with relevant information with which to tailor their response, including through novel mitigation approaches such as age-expanded seasonal malaria chemoprevention and mass drug administration, and highly adaptable delivery approaches such as presumptive treatment of patients suspected to have malaria. Up next is a look at intellectual property rights regime within the East African community developed by the Kenyan Association of Manufacturers. This report has been developed against the backdrop of escalating incidences of counterfeiting and piracy in Kenya and the East African community region as a whole. It is intended to aid advocacy work within the region, raise the respect for intellectual property rights as a key driver in the East African community industrialization agenda, as enshrined in the East African Community Common Market Protocol and Treaty. It will be a useful tool for law enforcement agencies involved in the prosecution of crimes related to counterfeiting and piracy, and the enforcement of the laws against the trade offenders. It also seeks to act as a guide for lawmakers within the East African Community region in prioritizing the issue of intellectual property rights and its protection in the region, and the utilization of the intellectual property rights for economic advantage. Still, on intellectual property, I highlight a report from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development that discusses how policies on trade, manufacturing, and intellectual property can speed up Africa's response to the coronavirus. It focuses on enabling access to medical devices and drugs in 4 critical areas, which are testing, protecting, treating, and curing. For each area, the paper provides a snapshot of the global situation, a zoom on trends in Africa, and examples of solutions implemented by both the public and the private sectors. It identifies the following 5 priority actions for Africa to respond effectively to COVID-19 and accelerate structural transformation and development across the continent. And these are: number 1, fast-track imports, exports, and movement of skilled personnel within Africa and globally. Number 2, scale up local manufacturing capacities. Number 3, act united. Number 4, bridge short and long-term financing gaps. And at number 5, ensure affordable access to technology, knowledge, drugs, and vaccines. At number 4 is a policy paper jointly published by the African Union Commission, UN Women, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, and the United Nations Population Fund on gender-based violence in Africa during the COVID-19 pandemic. This briefing report summarizes published grey literature and media reports on the rise of gender-based violence as an aspect of the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdowns in Africa. The paper documents the sharp increases in gender-based violence, outlining consequences, emerging priorities, promising practices, and highlighting their potential to effectively support and protect women and girls from gender-based violence as a standard part of response to the COVID-19 pandemic in the African region. The paper recommends that, number 1, member states need to ensure that institutional mechanisms are fully responsive to the rights and needs of women and girls during this COVID-19 period. Number 2, stakeholders need to step up advocacy and awareness campaigns, including targeting men and boys. Number 3, the African Union, member states, and development partners need to support the strengthening of data and evidence. And finally, at number 4, it recommends that member states and development partners need to sustain commitment to adequately fund strategies for ending gender-based violence in COVID-19. Finally, on my list is a report on sustaining inclusive peace on the front lines of climate changes that notes that there are important opportunities for action even as the negative impacts of climate change on security become more visible every day. The report outlines that climate change is already resulting in risks for the security of many millions around the globe. These risks disproportionately affect women and girls who are key providers of food, water, and energy, but have fewer resources with which to adapt to changing conditions. However, in some regions, the impacts of climate change are also leading to important socioeconomic shifts that are transforming traditional gender norms around economic activity, decision-making, and leadership. The report argues that such changes have the potential to open up new spaces for more inclusive peace and development process. Its recommendations provide a clear way forward, encouraging us to recognize the interdependence of peace and security, human rights, and development. So this is all I have this week. Do keep the recommendations coming in. I am always happy to share them. So till next week, stay safe, everyone.